The arm came across the door about a foot in front of my chest, which was closer than anyone had put a limb across my path in a good many years. And I stopped, because I am a reasonable woman, and the arm was, technically, doing its job. "You can't be back here," the man attached to the arm said. "Watch floors restricted." It was 0640 on a Tuesday. I had been on the installation for 11 minutes. I had a plain leather folder under my left arm with my orders in it, and I was wearing my service blues, the coat and the ribbons, and nothing else that would mean anything to a person who did not already know what he was looking at, which this man plainly did not. He was a civilian contractor. I could tell from the polo shirt with the security company's logo stitched over the heart, and from the way he wore the lanyard, and from the particular flavor of certainty he had, which is a flavor I have learned to recognize across a crowded room and, on this occasion, across a distance of about 11 inches. His badge said, Sawyer. He was in his middle 30s, broad, gym-strong in the way of a man who has time in the evenings, and he had the relaxed posture of someone who has never once in his professional life been wrong about anything that mattered to him, largely because nothing that has happened to him has mattered very much. Behind him, through the propped inner door, I could see the watch floor itself, the banks of monitors, the status boards, the low blue light that every operations floor in the world seems to run on, as if the work happens better in the dark. 2 young airmen were at the nearest console, and both of them were watching us over the tops of their screens with the frank curiosity of people who have decided that whatever is about to happen at the door is more interesting than their actual jobs, and who are not wrong. "I understand," I said. "I'm reporting in. I need to get to the command post." "Right," Sawyer said, in the tone people use when they have decided you are a small problem they can solve by being patient with you. "So the thing is, ma'am, this is a controlled area. Badge holders only. I don't have you on my access roster." He tapped a clipboard on the podium beside him, not looking at it. "So I'm going to need you to head back out front, and somebody'll come get you when they're ready for the tour." The tour. I have commanded a watch floor busier than that one on a worse day than he has ever had, with more lives riding on the calls coming off of it than he has ever been responsible for in his life. I did not tell him any of that. I have learned over a long career that the people who most need to hear a thing like that are almost always the people least able to hear it, and that saying it out loud mostly just gives them something to push against. So I did not push. I stood there in the corridor with my folder and my ribbons that he could not read, and I let the word tour sit in the air between us. "Could I make one phone call first?" I said. He smiled. It was not a cruel smile. I want to be fair to him, even now, even after everything. It was worse than cruel. It was indulgent. It was the smile you give a lost tourist who has asked you a question you find charming. "Sure, sweetheart," he said. "Call whoever you want." Let me tell you who was standing in that corridor being told to call whoever she wanted. I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force. I have been in for 19 years. My career field is command and control, which is a bloodless phrase for a thing that is not bloodless at all. It means I run the room where the decisions get made when the decisions cannot wait. It means that when something is happening, somewhere, at speed, in the dark, I am one of the people whose job is to stay calm while everyone's worst day arrives all at once, to take in more information than a human being is built to hold, and to make the call, and to own the call, and to do it again 90 seconds later for as many hours as it takes. I am good at it. I'm not saying that to boast. I am saying it because it is the relevant fact. A person is good at what they have paid for, and I have paid for this. I have the kind of calm that does not come free. It is not a personality. It was built, the way a callus is built, over a great many nights that I would not wish on anyone, by a version of me who did not have it yet and needed it, and had to make it out of whatever was lying around. I had been sent to that installation to command the wing's command post, the operations commander. I was, as of the change of command that Friday, going to be the person who owned that watch floor, that corridor, that door, and every standard that ran through all 3. Colonel Sawyer's arm, if you want to be technical about the chain of things, was about to be working for me. He did not know that. That was the whole point of the morning. I had come early, and quiet, and plain, because a watch floor tells you the truth about itself in the first hour if you arrive as a nobody. and it performs for you the entire time if you arrive as a somebody. I wanted the truth. I have always wanted the truth more than I have wanted the deference, which is a preference that has cost me a certain amount of deference over the years, and which I have never once regretted. Let me give you a picture of the version of me that Sawyer could not see, because it is the whole gap the story lives in. 4 years before that corridor, I ran the operations watch on a combined air floor in a place I will not name, on a night when a great deal was happening at once, and none of it was going the way anyone had planned. I was a major then. The floor I ran was 3 times the size of the one Sawyer was guarding, and it was full, every seat, every screen lit, 30-odd people whose job that night was to hold the line between a bad situation and a catastrophic one. And my job was to hold the 30-odd people. That is the part that does not show up in the movies about this work. The information is not the hard part. The information is just numbers and voices and symbols on a screen. The hard part is the people, because the people are afraid, and a floor full of afraid people makes bad calls fast, and the only thing standing between them and the bad calls is whether the person at the front of the room is calm, and whether the calm is real, because they can tell. They can always tell. Fake calm makes it worse. They smell it, and it confirms their fear. So you learn to be actually calm, which is not the absence of fear. I want to be precise about this, because it is the thing I know best in the world. Calm is not being afraid. Calm is being exactly as afraid as the situation warrants, and functioning anyway, at full capacity, with your voice level and your hands steady and your decisions clean, while the fear does whatever it is going to do somewhere off to the side where it cannot reach the work. That is a skill. It is the only skill I have that I would call rare. And it is invisible. You cannot see it on a person standing in a corridor in her service blues. It does not read across 11 inches to a man in a polo shirt. It is the most valuable thing about me, and it is completely illegible to exactly the kind of person most likely to underestimate me, which is one of the small structural jokes of my life that I have learned to find funny instead of bitter most days. That night, 4 years before the corridor, we got it right. Barely, and not prettily, and with a cost I still think about, but right. Nobody who was on that floor has ever forgotten who was at the front of the room, and none of them, I promise you, would ever in their lives put an arm across my chest and call me sweetheart. But that is the thing about a reputation. It only exists inside the walls where it was earned. Carry it out the gate and into a corridor on a strange base at 0640 on a Tuesday. And it evaporates, and you are just a small woman in blue that a stranger cannot read. I have spent my whole career walking in and out of that evaporation, respected inside the room and invisible the moment I step out of it. And I have made a kind of study of the people I meet in the invisible part, because they are showing me their true faces, the faces they would never show a woman they knew was a colonel. It is why I always come to a new command early and quiet and plain. I have done it at every unit I have ever taken. I arrive a day or two before anyone expects the new boss, in the least remarkable clothes the situation allows, and I walk the spaces as a nobody, and I watch. I watch how the troops talk to each other when they think no one who matters is listening. I watch who holds the door and who lets it swing. I watch what happens at the edges, at the desks and the entries and the break rooms, because a unit's real character does not live in the commander's office or the mission brief. It lives in the 10,000 small unwatched moments, and the fastest way to see those moments honestly is to be, for a day, a person no one thinks is worth performing for. It is the single most useful thing I do, and it works precisely because of the thing that was, at that moment, an arm across my chest. The underestimation is not only a wound, it is also, if you have the stomach for it, a tool. The same illegibility that lets Sawyer call me sweetheart is the illegibility that lets me see a unit's true face before it composes itself for the boss. I have paid for that view with a lot of mornings like this one, and I have decided, on balance, that the view is worth the mornings, though I will admit the exchange rate feels worse when you are standing in the corridor and better when you are looking back on it. So I had gotten what I came for. That is the part I keep having to remind myself of when I tell this story. I asked the watch floor to show me the truth about itself, and it did, immediately in the first 11 minutes at the door. The truth was standing right there in a polo shirt with an arm across my chest, calling me sweetheart. I could have ended it with one sentence. That is the part people always want to skip to. Why did you not just tell him who you were? It is a fair question, and it has an answer, and the answer is the reason I am telling you any of this at all. I did not tell him because the moment I told him, I would never find out what he was. A man who lets you through the second he learns your rank has told you nothing about himself except that he can read insignia. It is the man who does not know your rank who shows you exactly who he is. And I had a strong feeling, standing in that corridor, that Sawyer was in the middle of showing me and that I owed it to whatever came next to keep watching. So I did not reach for the sentence. I reached for my phone. I want to tell you about a different door. In the fall of 2014, I was a captain, 29 years old, sharp and fast, and not yet calm, working the operations floor at a base I will not name, on a night that started ordinary and did not stay that way. Something was happening. I am not going to tell you what. It does not matter to this story what it was, only that it was real, and it was moving, and the window on it was measured in minutes and not hours. I needed to get from where I was to where the decision authority was, which meant going through a controlled entry, which meant going through a man at a door. He was a young defender, security forces, doing his job the way he had been taught to do it, which on that particular night meant standing on the letter of a procedure that had been written for a calmer world than the one we were in at that moment. My badge had glitched. It happens. The reader threw an error, and the light stayed red, and the young defender looked at the red light, and then he looked at me, and he made a choice. He chose the light, he chose the procedure. He chose the thing that could not get him in trouble over the thing that was true, which was that I was exactly who my badge said I was, and that the clock was running, and that both of us knew it. It took 4 minutes to resolve. I have those 4 minutes memorized. I can still feel them. I stood at that door, and I watched the seconds go, and I was as polite as I am capable of being while being that afraid. And it took 4 minutes, and by the time I got where I was going, the window had moved, and the decision that got made was not the decision that would have gotten made 4 minutes earlier, and a young airman named Wes Carver ended up on the wrong side of that difference. He lived. I want to be clear about that. This is not that kind of story. But he did not come home the same. And there is a version of that night, 4 minutes to the left of the one that happened, and in that version he does. And I have spent 12 years unable to prove which version was the real one, and unable to stop believing I know. I went to see him once, about a year after. He was out by then, medically, back in the flat middle of the country, in a town I had to fly into through 2 connections, and I sat in his mother's living room and drank a glass of iced tea I did not want, and we talked about nothing for an hour, the way you do, and neither of us said the word door. He was gracious about it. He was more gracious about it than I have ever been able to be, which is its own kind of hard to sit with. A young man who lost more than I did being kinder about it than the officer who was late. When I got up to leave, he walked me to my rental car, slow, and he said, at the curb, not looking at me, "It wasn't the 4 minutes, ma'am. You know that, right? It was 100 things. It wasn't the 4 minutes." And I said, "I know. Because you do not make a young man comfort you. That is not allowed. That is a line you do not cross." But I did not know it, and I still do not, and I have come to understand that he said it precisely because he could see that I would carry the 4 minutes forever, and he wanted, generously, to set me free of them. And that his wanting to was exactly the thing that made it impossible for me to accept. Some gifts you cannot take, because taking them would cost the giver too much of what you owe them. I flew home from that visit, and I did not sleep on the plane, and somewhere over the dark middle of the country, I stopped waiting to be forgiven and started, instead, keeping a promise. It is a better use of the same energy. Forgiveness was never going to come from the direction I wanted it, and waiting for it was just a way of making my guilt the center of the story, and Wes Carver was the center of the story, and the least I could do was get myself out of the middle of it and go be useful at doors. I have never blamed that young defender. That is important. He was doing what he had been trained to do, and the failure was not his. It was the training and the culture and the long chain of people above him who had built a door that rewarded the light over the truth. But I made myself a promise at that door, in those 4 minutes, and I have kept it for 12 years, and the promise was this. If I ever ran a door, it would not be held by ego. Not mine, not anyone's. A door in my house would open for the truth, fast, every time, and it would answer for itself if it did not. Standing in the corridor with Sawyer's arm in front of me, I understood, with a kind of tired clarity, that I was standing at that same door again. Different base, different year, same door. It is always the same door. There is one in every building, and the only question that has ever mattered is who is standing at it and what they love more, the truth or the feeling of being the one who decides. Sawyer, I was fairly sure, loved the feeling. But I did not want to be sure on a feeling. So I made the call. I dialed one number. I knew it by heart because I had been given it 3 weeks earlier in a warm handoff email from the man I was replacing, with a note that said, "Call me directly if you need anything, before the change of command. I mean it." It rang twice. "Maddox," the voice said. "Sir, it's Reagan Kilmer," I said. "I'm reporting in early. I'm standing at the command post door. I can't get onto the watch floor, and I could use someone to come down." There was a short pause, the kind a smart man takes when he is reading between the words, and Colonel Grant Maddox was a very smart man, which was why he was the wing commander, and not something less. "You're at the door," he said. "Yes, sir." "And you can't get in?" "No, sir." Another pause. "Give me 2 minutes," he said, and the line went dead, and I put the phone back in my pocket. That was the whole call. I want you to notice what was not in it. I did not say who I was to Sawyer. I did not say the word colonel or commander or any word that would have solved my immediate problem in the cheap way. I did not perform. I made a plain call to a competent man, and I told him a plain fact, which was that a door in his building was not working, and I asked him to come look at it, and then I hung up and I waited. Sawyer had watched the whole thing with an expression of growing entertainment. To him it had looked like exactly what he expected it to look like, which was a woman who did not belong there, calling somebody to complain that she had not been let in, and being told, no doubt, to wait like everybody else. "They'll get you sorted out front," he said, kindly, gesturing back down the corridor with his chin. "You didn't have to make a whole thing of it." "I don't mind waiting," I said, and I did not. I have waited at a great many doors. I have made a kind of peace with waiting that I think unsettles people who have not, because a person who is genuinely willing to wait has taken away the only real tool the person at the door has, which is your impatience. I leaned against the wall of the corridor, folder under my arm, and I waited, and the waiting changed the air, though Sawyer could not yet have told you how. There is a physics to a corridor like that, and I have felt it many times, and I have learned to read it the way a sailor reads a sky. When two people stand off against each other, and one of them is agitated and one of them is calm, the calm does not stay put. It spreads, it fills the space at the expense of the agitation, slowly, the way cold water fills a warm room, and everyone standing in the space begins, without knowing they are doing it, to migrate toward the calm, because the human animal is built to find the steadiest point in a room and orient to it when it senses that something is wrong. That is the whole secret of command, if you want it, distilled to one sentence. Be the steadiest point in the room, and the room will come to you, and you will not have to say a word. Sawyer felt it happening and did not understand it, and it made him louder, which is the exact wrong response, and the one his kind of certainty always reaches for. The louder he got, the calmer I got, not as a tactic, but as a simple consequence of who each of us was. And the calmer I got, the more the corridor tilted toward me, and I watched it tilt. I watched the younger airman, Pryor, drift a half step out from behind his console without seeming to decide to, angling toward the door, toward the calm, away from the man who was supposed to be the authority in that space and was audibly losing the room he did not know he was standing in. I watched Felt set down the thing in her hand and square herself to the corridor, alert, the posture of a person who has understood that the situation contains more than she was told and is getting ready, quietly, to be on the right side of it when it resolves. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew who I was. But all three of them, the two airmen and Sawyer himself, could feel the weather changing in that corridor, could feel that the small woman leaning against the wall with her folder was somehow, impossibly, the largest thing in the space, and that the man with the arm and the badge and the certainty was getting smaller by the second, and not one of them could have told you why, because the why was still 3 weeks of paperwork and 1 phone call and 19 years of built calm away from being visible, and it does not become visible until it does, and then it is the only thing in the room. Behind him, the 2 young airmen had stopped pretending to work. Sawyer did not like the waiting. That was the first crack, and it was a small one, and I only saw it because I was looking. A man who is right does not need you to leave. He can let you stand there all day, because your standing there does not threaten anything. It was only a man who was, somewhere underneath the certainty, not entirely sure who needed me gone, and Sawyer had begun, very slightly, to need me gone. He shifted his weight. He glanced at the clipboard he had not actually read. He looked down the corridor as if the front desk might send reinforcements to help him with a 5'5" woman leaning quietly against a wall. "Look," he said, and his voice had lost a little of the indulgence. "I don't know who told you could just come back here, but this is a secure facility, all right. I take that seriously, even if you don't. You people show up thinking the rules are for everybody else. You people." I filed it away. It is always instructive, the moment a person reaches for you people, because it tells you the exact shape of the box they have put you in. And Sawyer had put me in a box labeled entitled Civilian, Who Thinks She is Special, which was a fascinating box to be put in by a contractor while wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force. But I have long since stopped expecting these situations to make sense. "I understand," I said again. "I say I understand a great deal. It is true more often than people think, and it costs nothing, and it denies the other person the fight they are trying to start." "Do you, though?" he said. He was getting into it now. He had an audience, the two airmen, and a man like Sawyer is never more himself than when he has an audience and a person he has decided is beneath him. "Because I've been doing this a long time, and I know the type. You probably know somebody, right? You made your little call. Somebody's going to come down here, and I'm going to get chewed out for doing my job, and you'll walk in feeling real good about yourself." He shook his head. "It's always the same." He warmed to it. That is the thing about a man like Sawyer with an audience. He does not de-escalate. He cannot. The audience is oxygen, and he had two young airmen watching, and a woman he had decided was safe to be large in front of, and so he got larger. "I had a lady last month," he said, to the airman, now more than to me, settling into it, a raconteur. "Come through here just like this. No badge, real sure of herself. Gonna go see somebody. Real important. Turned out to be somebody's wife. Wanted to drop off a lunch." He laughed. "So you understand my position. Everybody's somebody till you check." "That's reasonable," I said, and I meant it, which annoyed him, because I had agreed with the principal and declined the insult and taken from the exchange the only thing he actually wanted, which was a fight. A man reaching for a fight and finding agreement is a man who has to reach again, harder, and I watched him decide to reach again. "Except you're not going to turn out to be nobody's wife, are you?" he said. "You've got the whole..." And he gestured at my coat, at the ribbons he could not read, at the plainness of me, with a kind of contempt that I found genuinely interesting, because it is not common to be held in contempt for wearing the actual uniform of the actual service by a man in a polo shirt, and I have learned to be curious about the uncommon ones. "You've got the whole thing going, the costume, let me guess. You did some time, you got out, now you like to come around and remind everybody. I see it a lot, the ones who miss it." The costume. I filed that one away too, next to You People and Sweetheart, in the growing folder I was keeping on the interior life of Brett Sawyer, which was turning out to be a richer and sadder document than I had expected when the morning began, because that last one told me something the others had not. A man does not say the costume about a uniform he respects. He says it about a uniform he wanted and did not get, or got and lost, or watched someone else wear while he stood at a door. There was a whole grief in the costume, and I did not have time to excavate it. And it was not my job to, but I heard it, and it changed the temperature of what I felt for him from irritation to something closer to the flat sadness you feel looking at a thing that did not have to break and broke anyway. Behind him, the younger of the two airmen, the one whose badge I would later learn said, Pryor, had gone very still, and I could see him warring with himself. The way you war with yourself when a person you are supposed to defer to is doing something you know in your gut is wrong. He did not say anything. I did not want him to. It would have cost him something he could not afford and gained nothing, and one of the things you learn, watching floors, is when to spare the young ones the choice of being brave at their own expense. But I saw him not laugh. I saw him decline the easy thing. I made a note. "What's your access roster look like this morning?" I asked. It was a mild question. I asked it mildly. But something in it landed wrong for him because his hand moved to the clipboard, protective, a small unconscious thing. And I watched it move, and I understood that the clipboard was where the truth of him actually lived, and not the arm, or the polo shirt, or the You People. "That's not your concern," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." And I looked at the clipboard, and I let him see me look at it, and I said nothing else. and the silence did the work that silence does. Because I had noticed, in the way you notice things when you have run Access rosters for 19 years, that the top sheet on his clipboard had entries in it for the current morning, timed entries, names, and times, and that the handwriting was all the same pen, and the times were all clean 5-minute marks, 0600, 0605, 0610, which is not what a real Access log looks like. A real Access log is messy. People arrive at 6:03 and 6:07 and 6:12. A log with clean 5-minute marks in one pen is a log that was filled in all at once, after the fact, by someone who was not actually checking anyone in, and who needed it to look if anyone ever asked like he had been. I did not say that. I did not need to say it. I only needed to know it, because it changed what this was. Up to that point, it had been about me, a small wrong done to one person in a corridor, the kind of thing you let go because letting go is cheaper than the fight. It was not about me anymore. A man who fakes an Access log on a controlled watch floor is not a rude man having a bad morning. He is a hole in the wall of the building. And I was about to own the building. I want to tell you about the thing I did next because it is the part I am least sure I got right, and I have thought about it more than any other part. I stepped a little to the side, out of the airman's line of sight, closer to Sawyer, and I lowered my voice so that what I said would be between the two of us, and I gave him a door. One honest door. I did it on purpose, and I did it quietly, and I did it because of a young defender at a different door 12 years ago, who I have never blamed and never forgotten. Here's what's about to happen, I said low. In about a minute, someone is going to come down that corridor, and this is going to stop being a small thing and start being a large one. Before that happens, I am going to give you one chance to walk it back. Take your arm down. Let me put my folder on your podium so you can see what's in it. Fix your log. Do those 3 things in the next 60 seconds, and I will forget the word, sweetheart, and I will forget the arm. And this becomes a morning where a contractor was careful about a stranger, which is a morning nobody remembers by lunch. That is a real offer. I would take it if I were you. He looked at me, and for just a second, a real second, I saw him weigh it. I saw the animal part of him, the part underneath the certainty, catch the scent of something and go still. He almost took it. I have replayed that second many times, and I believe he almost took it. And then the certainty closed back over him like water, because the alternative to taking it was admitting he had been wrong about me. And there are men who would genuinely rather lose everything than admit that. And it turned out Sawyer was one of them, though I do not think he found out he was that kind of man until that exact morning. Most of us never find out. He was unlucky. The test came to his door. "Is that a threat?" he said, and his voice came up, loud again, back to the audience, back to the performance. "Are you threatening me? Did everybody hear that?" "She's threatening me." "No," I said, and I stepped back to where the airman could see me again, and I let my voice come back to normal because the private offer was over, and it had been refused, and there was no more use for the quiet. "It wasn't a threat. It was the last easy exit, and you just drove past it." There is a specific stillness that comes over me at the moment a thing stops being avoidable, and it came over me then. It is not anger. I had used up whatever small anger the word sweetheart had lit 20 minutes earlier, and there was none left, and what replaced it was the flat, operational calm that is the only thing I have ever been truly excellent at. The decision, when it landed, was not a decision to punish him. I want that understood because it is the whole moral center of the morning and the thing I would want you to take from it if you take nothing else. I did not decide to end Brett Sawyer. I decided to hold a standard, and holding the standard was going to end Brett Sawyer, and those are not the same act even though they produce the same result, and the difference between them is the difference between a person you can trust with a door and a person you cannot. Because here is the trap, and it is a real one, and I have watched good people fall into it. When someone humiliates you, and then you discover you have the power to destroy them, the destruction feels like justice. And it is so easy, so natural, so nearly invisible to let the private wound drive the public act. To tell yourself you are holding the standard when what you are actually doing is settling the score. And the terrible thing is that it looks identical from the outside. The log was fake either way. He assaulted an officer either way. The paperwork reads the same whether I filed it out of principle or out of spite. The only place the difference exists is inside me, in whether I could have let the sweetheart go and still done every single thing I did next, and the answer had to be yes. And I made myself sit with the question until I was sure the answer was yes, and only then did I let the morning proceed. If the answer had been no, If I could not have done it for a stranger, if it was really about my pride, then I would have had no business doing it at all, and I would have walked onto that floor and quietly fixed the log myself and let the man keep his job and his dignity, because a standard enforced out of ego is not a standard. It is just ego with better paperwork. The answer was yes. I would have done it for anyone. I have done it for people who were perfectly polite to me. That is how I knew I was allowed. Okay, I said. I gave you the door. He did not know what that meant. He would. Colonel Maddox came down the corridor at a walk, not a run, which is how you can tell the truly senior ones. Nothing makes them run. He was a lean man of about 50 in a flight suit, with the particular unhurried presence of someone who has never in his adult life had to raise his voice to be the most important person in a hallway. And he took in the whole scene in about the time it takes to take in a whole scene, which for a man like that is very little time at all. He looked at me. He looked at Sawyer's arm, which was, incredibly, still up, still across the door, because Sawyer had committed to the arm the way you commit to a lie you have told too many times to take back. "Colonel Kilmer," Maddox said to me, and he said it warmly, and he said it clearly, and he said it at a volume that carried down the corridor and onto the watch floor and into the two young airmen and into Brett Sawyer, who I watched receive the word "Colonel" the way you watch a man receive news he cannot afford. "I'm sorry, I meant to have somebody meet you out front. I didn't expect you until Thursday." He turned, unhurried, to Sawyer. "I see you've met Mr. Sawyer." Sawyer's arm came down. It came down slowly, the way a thing comes down when the muscles holding it up have just been told, by some interior authority that overrides the man entirely, that the situation has changed and they are no longer needed. His face was doing something complicated. I have seen a lot of faces do that particular complicated thing over the years. The thing where a person's whole understanding of the last 10 minutes reorganizes itself in real time, where every sentence they said gets replayed against a new fact and lands, one after another, like a series of small doors, closing. "Colonel! She's a colonel, she's the colonel, the new operations commander." I put my arm across the incoming operations commander's chest and I called her sweetheart and I told her to wait out front and I asked her, out loud, in front of my witnesses, if she was threatening me. I watched all of that arrive in him. I did not enjoy it. I want to tell you that I enjoyed it, because that is the version of the story that is satisfying, the version where I stood in that corridor and felt the warm, clean rush of being proven right in front of everyone. But I have been proven right in front of people before, and I have learned that it does not feel like a rush. It feels like watching weather come in. You can see exactly what is going to happen, and you cannot stop it, and you would not, because it is only weather, only consequence, only the true shape of a thing finally becoming visible. And there is nothing in that to enjoy. There is only the cost of it, gathering, about to fall. "Sir," Sawyer said. It came out cracked. "Sir, I didn't. She didn't have a badge. She's not on my roster. I was following the procedure. I was doing my job." "I'm sure you thought you were," Maddox said, and there was no heat in it at all, which was somehow worse than heat. He turned to me. "Colonel, the watch floor's yours. It's been yours since the order's cut. Come on in whenever you're ready." Then to the two airmen, who had come to a kind of attention behind their consoles. "Airman Pryor, get the colonel a visitor badge coded to her orders, and pull this morning's access log for me, the paper one. Don't let anybody touch it before I see it." Airman Pryor said, "Yes, sir." And he looked at me as he said it, and I saw in his young face the exact thing I had once seen in my own, 12 years and one lifetime ago, at a different door, and I made a note of him. "Sir," Sawyer said again, because a man in that moment will keep saying sir the way a person falling will keep grabbing at the wall. "Sir, with respect, I want it on the record that I was following procedure. She didn't have a badge. Anybody would have done the same." "Anybody would not have done the same," Maddox said, and it was still quiet, still without heat, which is the register of a man who has fired a lot of people and learned that the volume is for amateurs. "The airmen behind you did not do the same. They stood there and did their jobs and did not put a hand on a stranger and did not call her anything. So no, not anybody. You." He let that sit. "We'll do this properly. There's a process and you'll get all of it, but you're done at this door as of right now. Airman Felt, would you escort Mr. Sawyer to the front desk and wait with him until the security forces desk sergeant arrives?" Senior Airman Felt came around her console. She was 25, composed, and she did the thing well, which is to say she did it without cruelty and without apology. 2 steps back and to the side, one hand indicating the corridor. "Sir, this way, please," to a man twice her authority, 10 minutes earlier, and now nothing at all. He went. There was nowhere else to go. A man walked to the front desk by a senior airman, while a colonel he did not know he had assaulted. Watches him leave is a man being processed by the machine, and the machine had him now. And the machine is patient and thorough and does not care in the slightest how sure he had been. Sawyer stood in the middle of the corridor with his arm down and nothing left to hold up. It did not take long after that, and it did not happen in a way that anyone would call dramatic, because that is not how the institution actually does its worst work. The institution does not shout. It fills out forms. The paper log went to Maddox, and then it went to the Security Forces Squadron, and then it went to the contracting office. And somewhere in that chain, a person whose job it is to compare a paper log to the electronic badge records ran the two against each other and found what I already knew they would find, which was that Sawyer's clean 5-minute entries did not match the badge system that morning or any morning going back a while, that he had in fact been signing an empty log to look busy on a controlled watch floor, that the wall he was supposedly guarding had been, for some unknowable stretch of time, guarded mostly in theory. That is a thing that ends a contract. It is a thing that ends a career in that line of work, permanently, because the one thing that world cannot forgive is the discovery that the guard was not really guarding. Laying his arm across the chest of a lieutenant colonel and calling her sweetheart in front of 2 witnesses was, in the end, almost beside the point. It was the log that did it. He had built the case against himself, one clean 5-minute mark at a time, long before I ever walked up to his door. He was out by morning. His badges were pulled that afternoon, and by the next day the contract company had walked him off the installation, and someone else in a polo shirt was standing at the door, and the door did not remember him, because doors do not. I did not watch him go. There was a version of me, a younger version, the captain at the other door 12 years ago, who might have made sure to be there, who might have wanted to see it. I was not that captain anymore. I had a watch floor to take over, and 1,100 things to learn about it, and no appetite whatsoever for the sight of a man being walked to his car. I heard about it the way you hear about the weather clearing, secondhand, without lifting my head from my work. Maddox found me on the floor that afternoon, after the log had gone up the chain and come back down with its verdict attached. He did not make a thing of it. He is not a man who makes things. He stood beside me at the back of the room, both of us looking out at the consoles, and he said, "I owe you an apology. Not for the door, for the fact that the door was like that and I didn't know. That's on me. I run this wing. I should have known what my access looked like at 0640 on a Tuesday, and I didn't, and it took my incoming ops commander getting an arm across her chest to find out." He shook his head. "That's a bad way to learn a thing." "It's the usual way, sir," I said. "Nobody looks at the door until the door does something. That's not a failure of attention. It's just what doors are. They're invisible until they're not." "Still," he said. And then, after a moment, with the ghost of something dry in it, because he was, I was learning, my kind of officer. "You could have just told him who you were. Saved yourself a morning." "I could have," I said. "Why didn't you?" And I told him the truth, because he had earned the truth, and because it was going to matter to how we worked together for the next 2 years. Because if I'd told him, sir, he'd have snapped to and let me through, and I'd have walked onto a watch floor that had a hole in it and never known. He'd have been polite to the colonel and gone right back to signing an empty log the second I was inside. The rudeness was never the problem. The rudeness is what let me find the problem. If he'd been charming this morning, we'd still have a fake access log on a controlled floor, and I'd be none the wiser. I looked at him. I'd rather be insulted and informed than flattered and blind. Every time. It's not even close. Maddox looked at me for a second, and then he nodded. Slow, the nod of a man revising upward his estimate of a person, and he said, "I think we're going to get along." And he went back to running his wing, and we did. Later, Felt caught me at the coffee station, the real one, the one on the floor, and she hovered the way young troops hover when they have something to say and no framework for saying it to a colonel. I let her find it. "Ma'am," she finally said, "this morning, I didn't say anything when he had his arm up. I just stood there." She was ashamed, and it was costing her to say it, and it was exactly the right instinct pointed at exactly the wrong target. "You did your job," I said. "You didn't laugh. You didn't help him. When the wing commander needed a hand, you walked a man to the desk with your head up and no theatrics. That's not nothing, Airman. That's most of it. You want to know the difference between you and Sawyer. He needed the corridor to know he was important. You didn't need the corridor for anything. Hold on to that. It's rarer than you think, and the Air Force runs on it." She stood a little straighter, and she said, "Yes, ma'am." And she went back to work, and I made a second note, next to the one about Pryor. He was out by morning, and I felt, when I heard it, exactly nothing that I would call satisfaction. I felt the way you feel when a thing that had to happen has happened, which is to say, I felt the cost of it, and I felt the quiet, and I felt, underneath both, the old familiar ache of a door that had been held by the wrong person, and the small hard relief of having, this time, been in a position to do something about it. I stayed late that first night after the day shift had gone and the mid-shift had settled into the low blue hum, and I stood at the back of my own watch floor and let myself finally feel the whole day. I thought about Wes Carver. I always do when a door goes wrong, and I am the one who gets to make it right, because the making it right does not undo the other one. That is the part nobody tells you about carrying something for 12 years. You do not get to trade. You do not get to walk one door open and have it retroactively open the other one. The real one, the one that stayed shut 4 minutes too long in the fall of 2014. Wes Carver was still on the wrong side of his difference and always would be, and no contractor getting walked off any installation was ever going to change that. And I have made my peace with it in the only way you can make peace with a thing like that, which is not really peace at all, but a kind of steady looking at it that does not flinch anymore. Here's what I have learned about the cost of holding a standard. It is real, and you pay it, and you do not get reimbursed. Sawyer had a life. I do not know what was in it. I know that he made a bad choice at a door, and then a worse one when I gave him a way out. And I know that the choices were his, and the consequence was his, and I know all of that, and it is all true. And it did not make the man's undoing weigh nothing in my hand. It weighed what it weighed. That is what the cost of the win actually is. It is not guilt, because I did nothing wrong. It is just the honest weight of a true thing, which you are required to carry whether you earned it or not, because the alternative to carrying it is pretending it weighs nothing. And people who pretend consequence weighs nothing are exactly the people who should never be allowed near a door. I stood at the back of my floor and I set one old weight down. Not Wes Carver, that one I will carry out. A smaller one, the one I had been holding since a corridor that morning, the small hot thing that the word sweetheart puts in your chest. The thing you tell yourself does not bother you. I let it go. It had done its job. It had kept me looking long enough to see the clipboard, and now I did not need it anymore. I thought, too, about the offer I had made him in the corridor, the quiet one, the honest exit. I have gone back over it many times. There is a school of thought that says I should not have made it, that a man who fakes a security log has forfeited the right to a graceful way out, that the offer was a weakness dressed up as mercy. I understand that school of thought, and I reject it, and here is why. The offer was not for him. Not really. The offer was for me. It was the thing that let me know, afterward, in the long quiet nights when you second-guess everything, that I had not gone looking for his ruin. I had given him every chance to make the morning small, and he had chosen, freely, with his eyes open, to make it large, and that choice was his, and not mine, and the offer is the proof of it. You do not extend the exit because the other person deserves it. You extend it because you need to be able to live with what happens when they refuse it. Mercy offered and declined is a very different weight to carry than a ruin you simply delivered. And I have carried both kinds in my life. And I know exactly how much lighter the first one is at 3 a.m. That is the whole quiet economy of holding a standard, and nobody teaches it to you. And you learn it too late to spare yourself the early mistakes. You will pay for the standard whether you enforce it or let it slide. Those are the only two options, and they both cost. Let it slide, and you pay in the slow rot of a floor that everyone quietly knows is not really guarded, in the erosion of the thing that makes the work mean anything. In the next Wes Carver who ends up on the wrong side of a door that nobody had the nerve to fix. Enforce it, and you pay in the weight of a man walked to his car, in the sleepless relitigation of whether you were fair, in the knowledge that you were the instrument even when you were not the cause. Both cost. The only choice you actually get is which bill you would rather be able to look at in the mirror. And I made that choice a long time ago, at a door in the fall of 2014, and I have never had cause to unmake it, and I did not unmake it that night either. The floor hummed. The midshift worked. It was, I realized, a good floor. The truth it had shown me that morning had been an ugly truth, but a floor that shows you an ugly truth in the first hour is a floor you can fix, and I intended to. I took command that Friday in the correct uniform, in front of the correct people, with the correct words, said in the correct order, and it was as dull as those things are supposed to be, and I have never been more grateful for dullness in my life. I kept the 2 airmen, Pryor and Felt. They had stood at their consoles that first morning and watched a contractor humiliate a woman at the door. And here's the thing I needed to know about them, and the thing I want you to notice. Because it is the whole point. Neither of them had laughed. In a corridor where laughing along would have been the easy thing, the safe thing, the thing that kept you on the right side of the man with the arm, neither of them laughed. Felt had gone still and watchful. Pryor had looked when Maddox said the word colonel, like a young man learning something he was going to keep. That is rarer than it should be, the not laughing, and it cannot be taught, and where I find it, I protect it. So I invested in them. I put Pryor on the hard problems, the ones that grow a person, and I taught Felt the thing that took me 19 years and a bad night to learn, which is that the calm on a watch floor is not a mood you are born with, but a callus you build on purpose, and that the building of it is the whole job. I wrote them both up at the end of that first quarter, not a reprimand, a recommendation, because the young ones who do the quiet right thing in a corridor, when no one is making them, are the ones the whole institution runs on, and almost nobody ever writes it down. And I changed the door. That was the last thing, and the first thing, and the thing the whole story was really about. I sat down with the Security Forces Squadron and the contract office, and we rebuilt the access standard from the ground up. And the new standard was not built to protect the feelings of the person at the door or to reward the appearance of vigilance. It was built for one thing, which was that the door would open for the truth, fast, every time, and that it would answer for itself if it did not, and that no one standing at it would ever again be allowed to love the feeling of deciding more than they loved the thing the door was actually for. The new standard got tested about 5 months in, which is how I know it worked, because a standard you have never seen tested is just a document. It was a bad night, a real one, the kind the floor exists for, and the details do not matter except that the clock was running the way it had run in the fall of 2014, and a senior officer nobody at the door recognized needed to get onto my watch floor faster than a badge check could clear. I was not at the door that night. I was inside at the front of the room where I belong when it is bad. But I heard about it after, from Pryor, who by then had rotated through a stint helping run the access procedures, because I had put him there on purpose, to teach him that the door and the floor are the same problem wearing 2 hats. What happened at the door that night was this. The reader threw a red light, the officer had no time, and the young defender on shift, faced with the exact choice that had cost 4 minutes and a piece of West Carver 12 years before, did not choose the light. He picked up the phone, made one call to the floor supervisor, confirmed the officer by voice and by the standard we had built for exactly this, and opened the door. 11 seconds. Pryor timed it, because I had trained him to time everything. 11 seconds instead of 4 minutes. That is the whole difference between the 2 versions of a night, and this time it fell on the right side of the line, and it fell there not by luck, but because a woman got stopped in a corridor 5 months earlier and decided the door was going to answer for itself from then on. Pryor told me about it standing at the back of the floor, and he was proud, and he had a right to be, and I let him have it. Then I asked him the question I ask all of them, the one that separates the ones who will be worth something from the ones who will just be competent. Whose 11 seconds was that? And he thought about it, and he did not say his own, and he did not say mine, and he said, "The officer who got through, ma'am. It was theirs. We just didn't take it from them." And I thought, there it is. That is the whole job. He had it. He was going to be fine. Better than fine. Felt made staff sergeant that spring, on the recommendation I wrote and meant, and the last I heard she was running an access section of her own somewhere. And I would put money on the fact that no one at her door has ever had to lose 4 minutes to somebody's ego, because she was there the morning it happened to me, and she does not strike me as a person who forgets. I did not name the standard after anyone, not after myself and not after Wes Carver, though I thought about it and decided against it, because a door held right does not need a name on it. It just needs to open. I hold it open now, on purpose, when I can, for the next person coming in. It is a small thing. It is the smallest thing. It is, I have come to believe, close to the only thing. I want to say one thing to you before I go, whoever you are, wherever you are standing. Someone is going to stop you at a door you have every right to walk through. They are going to put an arm across your path, literally or otherwise. And they are going to read your size or your voice or your plain clothes or your quiet way of being, and they are going to decide in about a second that you do not belong on the other side of that door. And they are not always going to be cruel about it. Sometimes they will be, and cruelty is at least honest. More often they will be indulgent, certain, kind in the specific way that is worse than unkindness. And they will call you sweetheart and tell you to wait out front, and something hot and small will start up in your chest, and you will have to decide what to do with it. Here's what I have learned in 19 years of doors. You do not owe the person guarding the wrong door the performance of proving you belong. That is a trap, and it is their trap, and the moment you start performing, you have agreed to be judged by someone who was never qualified to judge you. You do not have to flash the badge. You do not have to say the rank. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand quietly at the door and wait, and let them show you exactly who they are, because a person always tells you, if you can bear to keep watching. And then make your one call, not to complain, not to be rescued. Call the truth, plainly, to someone who can hear it. And let the truth do what the truth does, which is arrive on its own terms and rearrange the room without your help. But there is a second half to this, and it is the more important half, and I would not have earned the right to say it if I had only ever been the one stopped at the door. One day you will be the one holding a door. You will. Everyone gets there eventually, some door, some corridor, some small piece of authority over who gets through. And on that day you will feel it, the thing Sawyer felt, the sweet dark pull of being the one who decides. And in that moment you will get to choose what you love more, the feeling of deciding, or the truth the door was built for. Choose the truth. Open the door. Hold it open for the next person coming in. I still think about Sawyer once in a while, though less than I used to. I hope he landed somewhere. I hope the morning taught him the thing it had to teach him, though I have lived long enough to know that the lesson does not always take, that some people carry the wound of being caught and learn nothing from it but a new resentment. I cannot control that. None of us can. All you can control is whether you gave the person the honest exit before the weather came in. And I did, and he did not take it, and I have set that down, and I sleep fine. That is the whole of it. That is the last salute I have to give,